How can I change my bad attitude? If I know it's not right, what can I do to change it? And I'm going to take some principles this evening that are taught in Scripture. And actually, they're attitudes that are modeled after the attitude that Christ has, that typified his life. And we'll explain that at the end of this. But let's just dive into that.
How we can change my attitude,
yeah, my own attitude,
not my spouse's.
Exactly. There's a lot of people thinking, tonight, how do I change their attitude? Not for them tonight. It's for you. Number one, first one, is to give up your right to be considered number one. If you have a bad attitude, probably underneath it in your relationship is this attitude, I really should come first. I'm really more important. People don't say that to themselves, but instinctively they're acting on that. Mm-hmm. That this marriage exists to meet my needs and that what I want out of it should come first. And so I'm number one. I'm the more important of the two of us. You got to give up that whole attitude. You cannot be happily married. You can't have a Christ-like attitude and still be thinking, I'm number one. And it needs to be that way. You need to give up your right to consider that. Number two, and this goes along with the first, you give up your right. Notice I'm saying the right to be waited on. The Bible tells us that Jesus became a servant. He didn't become a master while on earth. He became a servant. And in a healthy relationship, both people are looking to give up their right to be waited on. And again, a lot of bad attitudes are, they just don't get it. They don't get me what I want when I want it. They're not pulling through. Things aren't lined up each day the way I want. The house isn't how I want it. It doesn't matter what it is, but the whole idea is that person exists to wait on me. And that's not, you got to give that up. If you want to get a better attitude, you've got to give up the idea I'm here to be waited on, because I don't know anybody that's happy who has the wait on me attitude. Mm-hmm. They're demanding, they're irritable, they're always critical. So just stop and ask yourself, do I really care about waiting on my spouse, or do I want to be waited on? Next, give up your right to use your strengths in a selfish way. The Bible tells us Jesus emptied himself when he became a man, and what that means is he emptied himself of his right to use his divine power in a selfish way. No miracles were ever for the sake of Jesus himself. He didn't turn stone into bread so he could have all he wanted to eat. He didn't divide waters so he could just not have to row across a lake. He gave up the right to use his strengths in a selfish way. And when you think about it, in a marriage where bad attitudes are really running rampant, people are taking maybe their verbal strengths and they're using it to pound away at their mate. Or maybe they're using their physical strength. Sometimes we hear sad stories of that, of abuse. You give up your right to use your strengths in a selfish way. Our strengths were given to us to meet somebody else's needs, not our own. Next, give up your right to keeping up the right appearance or appearances. And this is about image. It says Jesus took on the form of a man. He condescended to become a person with flesh when he was God. He didn't care about his appearance. In fact, Isaiah says there was nothing about his appearance to attract us to him. And I'm not talking so much about physical appearance, let your appearances go, but the idea that my image, I have a right to keep up my image. Mm-hmm. And people who have a bad attitude often are very image-driven. They care so much about what other people think, right, how they look, dress, act, whatever. And in the marriage, if the other person is maybe not feeling well or that day just couldn't quite get it together, hey, look at you. You're making me look bad. That attitude, maybe not spoken, comes through.
Yeah.
Give up your right to demand obedience. Jesus, it says, became obedient to the Father and humbled himself to death on a cross. And yet we get it the other way around. We, instead of requiring ourselves to be obedient, we demand that others obey us.
I've heard a lot of calls that have come in and emails where, particularly for men, obviously, who do not have a correct understanding of the biblical role of a husband and wife, and they go crazy in this area of demanding obedience.
Yeah, they want me to tell their wives to submit to them, and that they're the master of the household and whatever. And when I hear somebody demanding that, I know they don't deserve it, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
The people that deserve our submission, our respect, are the people that are those that are willing to give it away. Mm-hmm. To be looking more to see if some way they can obey God, or in some way that they can do something for their spouse.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the old saying that you can't demand that someone respect you.
Right.
It has to be
earned. And when you start demanding obedience, you've lost it. You've lost a great deal. Well, here's another thing. If you're going to get rid of a bad attitude, you've got to give up your right to avoid painful sacrifices. A lot of people have a very bad attitude because they don't want to sacrifice. They don't want to give up anything, even to be married. They want it all the way they used to have it, where they can run their own schedule, run their own life, eat wherever they want, whenever they want. And the idea that I will now have to give up and sacrifice some things to be married, no, I'm not going to do that. And that kind of bad attitude, when it creeps into a relationship where I'm in this, but I don't plan to sacrifice anything. I won't let this cost me. Mm-hmm. And if it does, I get very upset about what I have to stay home. I have to miss this. I can't go there. And really, Jesus didn't have that attitude at all. What was ahead of him was the cross, and he never complained. You can't find a word of him grumbling or complaining about that.
I remember when I was a youngster, or the age coming to the age of contemplating marriage, a wise pastor said, marriage has been said, it's a 50-50 proposition. He said, I think really it ought to be 100-100. That may not work mathematically, but if each person comes to the marriage with the attitude of giving full measure, 100% effort, not looking out for their own, not trying to avoid sacrifice, but being very sacrificial in their approach to the marriage, then you have a successful marriage.
And Aaron, Eric, I always have to add a caveat here, which is there's abused wives watching this tonight, and they're thinking, is Pastor Bob telling me to take more pain and to be beaten or abused? No. Please don't take what I'm saying to say that you should tolerate or excuse abusive behavior. That isn't what is being asked of here. This is the kind of behavior that ought to exist between two healthy people with proper respect. Even in those situations, you have to be able to give up some rights. But just a clarification, because that can be easily misunderstood. And finally, I guess this is the way to summarize it. This was the life of Jesus, according to Philippians chapter 2. You give up your right to demand your rights. You may still have rights in a marriage, but you give up the right to demand them. And anybody that's demanding their rights, again, is headed down, the wrong road. Jesus was the opposite. He had every right to avoid the cross, every right to be angry at humanity, every right to stay in heaven and just let us go our own way to destruction. Yeah. He gave all that up, it said, in order that he could come and humble himself and redeem us. So there is something redemptive in a marriage and in your own attitude when you give up your rights to have your rights.